Hello and welcome to this pre-recorded event for GCE Psychology 2015 specification, focusing on topics 1 to 4, which is Year 1 of the A-Level. Year 1 of the A-Level also makes up the AS course, with 2 exceptions, that will be explained during this event. There is a separate pre-recorded event for topics 5 to 9, which is Year 2 of the A-Level. This presentation will address the new GCE Psychology specifications for first teaching from September 2015, both the AS and A-Level specifications. The structure and content of the specification will be considered, as well as assessment of these new qualifications, including some exemplar material to support you in applying the new mark schemes for topics 1 to 4. There will also be an exploration of possible teaching and delivery strategies for the new qualifications, including co-teaching the AS and A-Level. To help you get the most out of this feedback, you may want to have the following documents handy, as we will refer to them during the session. These are the A-Level Specification, Component Guide 1, AS and A-Level Psychology, and both A-Level and AS-Level Sample Assessment Materials, SAMs. We will use A-Level Paper 1 SAMs and AS Papers 1 and 2 SAMs. There are 3 schemes of work on the Edexcel website, one for the AS, one for co-teaching the AS and A-Level, and a linear A-Level scheme of work. Having the linear A-Level scheme of work would be useful, as it is referred to. However, as the SAMs are large documents, as is Component Guide 1 and the scheme of work, and you might be accessing these online, if you cannot have them nearby during this presentation, that is fine. The aims and objectives of this event are for you to consider the structure, content, and assessment of these new qualifications, and the support available to guide you through the AS and the A-Level. The aim is also for you to explore possible teaching and delivery strategies for the new qualifications, including co-teaching AS and A-Level. Also, exemplar material is offered to support you in applying the new mark schemes for topics 1 to 4. The presentation starts with looking at the qualifications, A-Level and AS, and their structure. Then there is a look at Year 1, topics 1 to 4, content. After that, assessment in general is looked at with related issues, such as looking at the assessment objectives and the format of the exam papers. Teaching, delivery, and resources are then explored before coming back to some more assessment issues and to help in preparing students for the exams. The GCE Psychology specification has general aims, which help to understand the structure and content of the specification. These aims come from the subject criteria, an Ofqual document, that can be accessed using the link shown on the slide if you want to know more. Aims focus on students' understanding of different areas of psychology and how they relate to one another, as well as appreciating skills involved in doing psychology and having an understanding of scientific methods. Aims also include students developing competence and confidence in maths and method skills, as well as developing an interest in and an enthusiasm for the subject. It is also important for students to appreciate how society uses the sciences, including economic issues around that. You can see that the key question part of the specification is there to help to appreciate how society uses psychology when making decisions, including economic ones. For example, if students choose as the key question in biological psychology the issue of how effective drug therapy is in treating addictions, they can explore how treating addictions in this way helps society, not just because individual citizens are helped, but because of economic reasons too. You can see that the practical investigation helps in appreciating skills, knowledge, and understanding of scientific methods. Hopefully, by looking at these general aims, which are given in the front of the specification, you can see how the specification has been built to respond to what is required. The structure and content of the specification is looked at next. The basics of the GCE Psychology specification are 9 topic areas. A-level students study 7 topic areas, as topics 6, 7, and 8 are choices, and a student covers just one of them. Topics 1 to 4 are covered in A-level Year 1, and the AS comprises topics 1 to 4, though with 2 exceptions, which are explained later. Topic Area 1 is Social Psychology. Topic Area 2 is Cognitive Psychology. Topic Area 3 is Biological Psychology. Topic Area 4 is Learning Theories. Topics 5 to 9 are covered in Year 2 of the A-level. Topic Area 5 is Clinical Psychology, and all students cover this application. Topic Areas 6, 7, and 8 involve 3 applications, which are Criminological, Child, and Health Psychology. A student covers just one of these 3 applications. Topic Area 9 is Psychological Skills. This is a synoptic topic, which is revision in essence, because it draws together what A-level students have covered through their course in relation to method and studies. Also, Topic Area 9 is where the issues and debates are found. More is said about issues and debates later in this event. Topics 5 to 9 are covered in another presentation. This one focuses on topics 1 to 4. Within each topic area, there is a specific structure, except for Topic 9, the synoptic topic. All topic areas except for Topic 9 have the same structure. All start with some content, then methods, then studies, a key question, a practical investigation, and issues and debates. Issues and debates are separate from the topic areas, in that they are added to the end of each, but this is intended to illustrate how to thread them through the specification, rather than saying that they must be taught at the end of each topic area. They can be taught as is preferred, and they belong in Topic Area 9. More is said about this later in this presentation, when co-teaching is discussed. Here is an overview of the specification, to summarize what has been said so far, before going on to look more at the content itself. On this slide, the A-level is considered. The next slide looks at the AS. For the A-level, there are 3 exam papers, as you can see looking at the bottom table on this slide. Paper 1 focuses on topics 1 to 4. Social, cognitive, biological psychology, and learning theories. Paper 1 assesses foundations of psychology, which is what topics 1 to 4 are called. Paper 2 focuses on topics 5 to 8, clinical psychology, and then one from criminological, child, and health psychology. Paper 2 covers applications of psychology, which is what topics 5 to 8 are called. Paper 3 focuses on topic 9, which is the synoptic revision paper, Psychological Skills. This covers a review of methods covered through the course, a review of studies, and the issues and debates part of the course. Importantly, all 3 papers are taken at the end of the course. This means students will have covered all the material before they come to Paper 1. Therefore, they can be asked issues and debates questions in Paper 1, which is worth noting. More about assessment is covered later in this presentation. This is a brief overview of the AS course to summarize what has been said so far. The AS focuses on foundations of psychology, which involves the 4 topics: social, cognitive, biological, and learning, as in the A-level specification. AS students will carry out practical investigations, as do the A-level students, and the consideration of key questions, studies, and content is also the same. Differences are that some of the quantitative skills, elements of the maths, as well as the issues and debates sections in the topic areas, are not covered in the AS. These differences are what will be focused on later in this presentation, when co-teaching the AS and the A-level is considered. The AS level covers 4 topic areas, and there are 2 exam papers. AS papers will be sat at the end of the 1-year course. Paper 1 assesses topic areas 1 and 2, social and cognitive psychology. Paper 2 assesses topic areas 3 and 4, biological psychology and learning theories. In each paper, students will make connections across the topic areas in terms of content and skills. As this presentation focuses on topics 1 to 4, those are the ones considered from now on. Topics 5 to 9 are covered in a separate presentation. Topic 9 is an exception in a way, as it is a revision paper, drawing on topics 1 to 4, and includes a review of all the methods covered in those topics, as well as a review of the studies and coverage of issues and debates. It is good to remember that topics 1 to 4, though they may appear to be separate from Year 2 of the A-level, feed into Topic 9, and that Topic 9 revises some of what is covered. Also, Topics 1 to 4 are the foundations of psychology in this specification. They are drawn upon in Year 2 of the A-level, such as when biological and social explanations of crime are considered, and when biological causes and treatments for schizophrenia are covered. Also, methods are applied such as interviews in clinical psychology and experiments in criminological psychology, as well as observations in child psychology and questionnaires in health psychology. However, for this presentation, the foundations of psychology in this specification, social, cognitive, biological psychology, and learning theories, are now focused on. This slide briefly covers what is studied in the 4 topic areas that are the foundations of psychology and comprise Year 1 of the A-level, as well as the AS, mostly, as is explained later. You can see the structure of each topic area, as was explained earlier in this presentation. There is content, methods, studies, a choice of key question, and a practical for each of the topics. Issues and debates are missed off this slide, as they are not in the AS and can be taught when preferred. There is more about issues and debates later. In social psychology, students cover obedience and prejudice and related issues. They cover questionnaire and interview as research methods, as well as ethics, risk management, and sampling. Not everything is covered in this summary slide, but this is a brief overview so that you can see the pattern of Year 1 of the A-Level and the AS. It is worth looking at the different parts in the structure. Content differs in all topic areas, as of course you would expect, with some material chosen from that area of psychology. Memory is the focus in cognitive psychology, and biological psychology in general focuses on aggression. This is to help to narrow the focus for students to help their learning, such as looking at brain regions related to aggression. The 3 learning theories are familiar ones, and treatments for phobias are included. Content in each topic involves bringing in where individual differences and developmental psychology are found in each topic area. This is not bringing in new material, but highlighting where they are touched upon. This is because social psychology, cognitive psychology, biological psychology, developmental psychology, and individual differences are the 5 core areas of psychology, according to the British Psychological Society. So all have to be clearly covered in the specification. Methods are spread across the 4 topic areas, largely putting them where they fit so that they are embedded and hopefully make sense to the student. You can see that 4 inferential tests are also spread across the topic areas, those starting in cognitive, so that students can get to grips with descriptive statistics in social psychology first. With regard to studies, in each of the 4 topic areas, there is 1 classic study that is compulsory and 1 contemporary study from a choice of 3 contemporary studies. They are chosen to suit the content and methods as far as possible. For example, Schmolk et al. 2002 in Cognitive Psychology looks at 8 case studies of brain-damaged patients including HM. And case studies of brain-damaged patients including HM is a research method in cognitive psychology in the AS and A-level courses. For each of the 4 topic areas, there is 1 key question. 2 key questions are suggested in the specification, and students can choose one of them, or they can choose a different one. The idea is to apply their learning to anything that arises that society is interested in knowing more about. An example is about drug therapy for substance misuse, as has already been mentioned. Finally, apart from issues and debates, each topic area asks students to carry out 1 practical investigation. As you can see from this slide, the general method is given, but the actual practical they do is a choice within their area of study. In their practical, they use what they learned about analysis of data, such as inferential statistical testing. In cognitive psychology, students have to carry out an experiment in memory, but they can choose their own focus. Considering delivery and teaching, it is worth noting that the aim is for students to make links when learning content, methods, studies, key question, and practical in 1 topic area. They do not have to study each aspect separately. For example, Rain et al. 1997, the classic study in biological psychology, uses PET scanning, a method students have to cover in biological psychology. Rain et al. Also examines brain regions related to aggression. Some content students need to cover. Rain et al. Also uses independent groups, controls, and matching, which can help when studying methods. Of course, the course can be taught in any way that is preferred, including choosing to go section by section. There is a course planner, which gives an outline of how the course could be taught, and also schemes of work. These are accessible. using the edexcel.com website. The schemes of work have quite a bit of detail, including teaching ideas, and there is a scheme of work for the AS, one for co-teaching the AS and A-level, and one for a linear A-level. The course planner and schemes of work are in Word format on the website, as well as in PDF, so you can edit them to suit your needs. More about the free resources on the Edexcel website is considered in a later slide. Co-teaching the A-level and AS is looked at next, before moving on to assessment issues, and then more teaching and delivery ideas. There are two main differences for AS students compared to Year 1 A-level students. The aim is to enable AS and A-level students to be in the same class, if that is how a centre plans to deliver the courses. Though of course, students working on the AS or A-level can be in separate groups, and some centres will choose not to offer the AS. AS and A-level students can simply all cover the A-level material, which means doing all of topics 1 to 4 as has been explained. However, there are two main differences between A-level Year 1 and the AS course. This is because the AS students have to study at a level between GCSE and A-level, but the A-level students need to study at A-level throughout. One difference is in the quantitative skills and maths. The other difference is that the issues and debates are not required for AS. The quantitative skills difference is covered here first. Out of interest, it might be worth noting that in both the AS and the A-level, there must be at least 10% of the exam that asks about maths. This means calculations and so on as well. Use of numbers, not just the quantitative skills. For example, asking someone to calculate a mean average or a percentage difference is maths, whereas asking someone about levels of measurement is quantitative skills. Appendix 3 in the specification, pages 65 to 67, gives the quantitative skills document from the Ofqual subject content that was referred to earlier, and a link was offered to the subject content earlier. This is the subject content for A-level psychology, and the quantitative skills document is Appendix D in the Ofqual subject content. You will see in the specification that the list of quantitative skills required are numbered, starting from D01. A, B and C appendices in the Ofqual document relate to biology, physics and chemistry. Psychology has the D appendix. In Appendix 3, in the A-level specification, you will see 5 boxes that are emboldened, which means they are not in the AS. In the A-level specification, what is emboldened is not in the AS. For example, using the specification, look at page 20, which is learning theories, and you can see the emboldened areas are not required at AS. The relevant 5 boxes are: distinguish between levels of measurement, D1-10. Select an appropriate statistical test, D1-12. Use statistical tables to determine significance, D1-13. Substitute numerical values into algebraic equations, D2-2. Solve simple algebraic equations, D2-3. One difference for AS students is that they do not need to know about levels of measurement, although an understanding is not a bad thing. as it is useful for considering measures of central tendency. For example, the mean is not suitable for nominal data. Levels of measurement are needed for the choice of a statistical test, and choice of a statistical test is not required at AS level. But the students could do with knowing why they chose their test for the practical investigations. One way of co-teaching is to teach levels of measurement with issues around statistical testing when the AS students are revising, in the summer of Year 1 and after the AS is finished, in that summer term. As levels of measurement are useful to know about for the practical investigations, descriptive statistics, and understanding inferential testing, teaching them where they arise in the course is an option. AS students do not need to know reasons for choosing a statistical test, or to know how to use critical value tables, where A-level students do need to cover these areas. AS students do not need to choose a test or use statistical tables. However, they need to know about tests and use them in their practical investigations. It is a case of splitting doing a test from why it is chosen and what the result means. AS students do need to know how to use a statistical test, and they need to know other issues, such as levels of significance. Practical investigations are going to need statistical testing, and AS students have to do it. So, depending on their ability, perhaps teach them the A-level material. An alternative is to look at levels of measurement and reasons for choosing a test, as well as more about what a result of an inferential test means, after the AS exam in the summer term. Students need to understand the result of their practical investigations, but this could be given to them with an explanation coming later. Co-teaching might work well, using a decision to teach all students to the A-level. However, there is a time issue. Ideas about teaching the material in the time are considered later in this presentation. Another part of the quantitative skills that AS students do not need to cover, but A-level students do, is using equations. The A-level papers will have formulae in the front of them, so that A-level students can do calculations. But AS students do not need to be able to do such calculations in the exam, except for standard deviation. Currently, to make things equal, AS papers also have the formulae and critical values tables in the front of the exam papers, as do A-level papers. Formulae for the A-level include standard deviation, chi-squared, Spearman's, and Mann-Whitney U. The Wilcoxon test is also explained in the front of the exam papers. Practical investigations for A-level and AS students are going to require doing a test, and the methods section requires understanding of tests. But practicing test calculations can be left until Year 2 of the A-level. The tables and formulae that will be in the exam papers are in the sample assessment materials, SAMs, and also in the specification as Appendix 4, pages 69 to 73. Issues and debates are not in the AS course, though they can of course add depth to an argument, such as in an essay about a theory, study, or key question. For A-level, issues and debates can be taught throughout, relating them to each topic area each time. However, as the exams are at the end of Year 2, issues and debates could be taught near the end of the course, in Topic 9, which would take away a difficulty with co-teaching. A choice is to teach them anyway, through the 4 topic areas, as it can add useful depth, Another choice is to avoid them until the AS students have finished, or some combination of these choices, such as teaching some central ones. For example, issues around psychology and science arise in learning theories in any case. In the A-level course, there are 11 issues and debates that come from what students are required to know and understand in the subject content for A-level psychology. Some issues and debates are in the Year 1 topic areas more obviously. These are briefly run through here. Ethics is in social psychology. Practical issues in the design and implementation of research have to be considered in the practical investigations. And reductionism and psychology as a science are specified in learning theories. Culture and gender are considered when issues around obedience are looked at. Nature-nurture issues arise when twin studies are a method in biological psychology. And the use of psychological knowledge within society is covered by having a key question for society in each topic area. It could be argued that AS students can cover those issues and debates, at least to an extent. Then, in Year 2, the other 4 issues can be brought in. These are issues of social control and issues around socially sensitive research. Also, an understanding of how psychological understanding has developed over time, and comparisons between ways of explaining behavior using different themes. These issues can be brought into Year 1, of course. These are suggestions for teaching and delivery, taking into account co-teaching the A and AS levels. Here is a summary of the co-teaching issues. Then assessment is considered, before looking more at teaching and delivery ideas. There is a scheme of work you can access on the website for teaching AS and A-level together. The AS is Year 1 of the A-level with 2 exceptions. The exceptions are some of the quantitative skills and the issues and debates. AS students can cover Year 1 A-level without doing too much extra. If AS students use issues and debates arguments in their exam, they will get credit, though full marks are available without doing that. The A-level only material in Year 1 can be taught after the AS is sat. Issues and debates can be partly taught, as has been suggested. Having considered the specification structure and content, as well as some teaching and delivery ideas around co-teaching and issues and debates, assessment issues are now considered, before looking at more about teaching and delivery and resources, and then example answers to look more at assessment. Firstly, an important slide is looked at, which shows the assessment objectives for Science A-levels. In this case, psychology. Assessment objectives are called AOs for short. A main difference from GCE 2008 is in AO2 and AO3, such as theoretical and practical context, AO2, and the emphasis on refining practical design, AO3. AO1 is, as it was before, about knowledge and understanding, including of scientific ideas, processes, techniques, and procedures, which suits any assessment of knowledge and understanding, including in research methodology. Though in the 2008 specifications, AO1 did not include knowledge and understanding of method issues, it does now. AO2 is about applying and using knowledge and understanding, including when handling both qualitative and quantitative data, and the application of scientific ideas, processes, techniques, and procedures. AO3 focuses on analysis and evaluation, including making judgments and developing and refining practical design and procedures. Implications for assessment include that for both the AS and A-level courses, the 3 assessment objectives are split into about 1/3 of each for each examination. You can see that for the AS, there is more AO1, and for the A-level, more AO3. However, basically you can think of the AOs as thirds in each examination. AO2 requires students to show they can apply what they know, both theory and method, and focusing on both qualitative and quantitative data. You can expect a lot of stimulus questions, where a scenario is offered, and students have to apply their knowledge and understanding to the scenario. AO3 requires students to develop and refine practical design and procedures, so expect some assessment of their ability to improve research. That is something that could be practiced, including being part of their practical investigations. AO3 also requires evaluation, analysis, and interpretation, which is usual in A-level psychology. However, for the 2015 specification, there is a requirement to make judgments and reach conclusions. This means terms have that requirement within them. More about injunctions is given in a short while in this presentation. To explain this point about making judgments and reaching conclusions, and how an injunction signals that this is necessary. Firstly, the A-level specification exam papers are looked at, with the AS to follow on the next slide. The A-level comprises 3 externally assessed components. Paper 1 and Paper 2 assess the distinct areas of the qualification content, with Paper 1 assessing the foundations of psychology content, and Paper 2 assessing the application of psychology content. Paper 3 is the psychology skills part of the A-level, reviewing methodology, reviewing studies and covering issues and debates that have been threaded through the specification. There is no multiple choice in the papers. They use short answer and extended writing questions. Each paper lasts 2 hours, Papers 1 and 2 having 90 marks, and Paper 3 having 80 marks, as this gives more reading time. Note that Paper 3 is a revision paper in a way, as it is synoptic, so students will be well prepared for Papers 1 and 2 at the end of their course, and 30% of their A-level marks, Paper 3, focuses on their revision as well as their synoptic skills. Papers 1 and 2 comprise 35% each of the A-level. The focus of the AS course is on building students' knowledge and understanding of the basic concepts of psychology, with greater emphasis on breadth than depth. This is important, as many students are studying psychology for the first time at this stage. The AS exam involves Paper 1 and Paper 2. It is important to note that the AS Paper 1 and the AS Paper 2 are completely different exam papers from the A-level Papers 1 and 2, and that the AS marks do not count towards the overall A-level. The AS is a separate standalone examination, and any student can put in for the AS and/or the A-level. They are not mutually exclusive. The AS papers both have 70 marks, and both last 1.5 hours. They are in the same format as one another. Paper 1 has social and cognitive psychology as its focus, and Paper 2 has biological psychology and learning theories as its focus. In both, there is an end section, which has an extended response question, aiming to cover the other two topic areas in a synoptic way. The AS will not have 16 or 20 mark questions, as the A-level does. More about questions and marks and so on follows later in this presentation. This slide looks at injunctions. Appendix 6 in the specification, pages 77 to 78, gives the injunctions that will be used. Injunctions that tend to ask AO1 questions include describe, give, complete, define, name, and state. Others in the list can also be used to ask for AO1 skills. For AO1, there must only be 10% of the questions that ask for pure recall, so injunctions like explain will be used alongside injunctions asking for pure recall, as explain does not involve just pure recall. Injunctions that tend to focus on AO2 include discuss, compare, possibly analyze, calculate, plot, predict, suggest, possibly justify. Others in the list can also be used to ask for AO2 skills. As was said when considering the assessment objectives for the course, students will be applying their knowledge and understanding by responding to stimulus materials. When they apply what they know to a novel situation, that will be AO2. With regard to AO3, injunctions need to be those that ask for judgments and conclusions to be drawn, which are clear in Appendix 6. These include explain, evaluate, assess, and to what extent. Students can study Appendix 6 so that they know what they are being asked to do in each question. Having looked at the specification structure and content, and at assessment issues, including some ideas for teaching and delivery, more teaching and delivery ideas are now covered, mainly by focusing on the free resources available. After this section, more is given about assessment, including some exemplar materials, before ending this presentation. There are resources for GCE psychology, and they are found on the edexcel.com website, where there are links to resources. In the website section, Teaching and Learning Materials, you will find an editable course planner for AS and A-level, as well as editable schemes of work. There is an AS, an A-level, and a co-teachable scheme of work. The scheme of work gives a week-by-week plan for content to cover, including ideas and suggested resources. Regarding the schemes of work, they are planned to stretch over about 34 weeks in a year, focusing on about 4.5 hours teaching a week. Of course, you may not have that time available. Students doing 3 A-levels and perhaps an AS, if 4.5 hours a week are available, in their first year have 18 hours of lessons. For a full-time student, more hours could be expected. Perhaps 26 hours is not an unreasonable amount a week. So a Year 1 A-level student can offer 2 hours additional study time for psychology, and a Year 2 A-level student can offer around 4 extra hours a week. Homework could take care of some of the material, to ease the time pressure regarding getting through the material. There are video resources, which are voiceovers, on different aspects of the course. There are 4 voiceovers. One is on the A-level in general, one on co-teaching AS and A-level, one on practical investigations, and one on the maths element of the courses. A mapping document helps to move from 2008 specifications, including those of other awarding bodies. Also, there is mathematical guidance. A main resource is 3 component guides, which have references to the studies, links to help with teaching, and other resources. Last but not least, a Getting Started guide. In these resources, you will find a lot of teaching ideas, including URLs for the studies and URLs linking to different content areas. There are also ideas for key questions, as well as ideas about the practical investigations. A look at the content pages of the documents should guide you to what you need. This is a short example from a scheme of work, showing that you have some content suggested and some suggested resources. There is a URL to go with the suggested resources when you look at the relevant week. This is just a small example to give the idea of what is available. The content here is 2 memory models, working memory and reconstructive memory, required in cognitive psychology. The resources include the suggestion for replicating the War of the Ghosts story and the idea of using Allport and Postman with a link suggested. Finally, the suggestion of labeling a diagram to learn the working memory model. Hopefully, this gives you an idea of what is given in the schemes of work. References and links for the contemporary studies. This is an example from Component Guide 1 to show the sort of material that is there. This slide gives the reference for Riker and Haslam, 2006, which is one of the contemporary studies in social psychology. There are 3 contemporary studies, and you can choose one of them. Here also is a URL to a very detailed overview of the study, and another URL, as well as a link to the full journal article. There is also YouTube material on this study for you to use if you wish. You will find all the studies covered in this way in the component guides. Component Guide 1 covers the AS and Year 1 of the A-level. Having considered the specification structure and content, and assessment, and some teaching ideas, including resources, assessment is returned to as promised. Here are some example answers to look more at assessment. In the papers, there will be points-based marking and levels marking. Both are briefly illustrated in the next few slides. You have the sample assessment materials, SAMs, to use as a basis for question setting and marking. One of the questions used here is from the AS Paper 1 in the SAMs, and one is from the A-Level Paper 1. Firstly, some information about levels marking. Here is some information about levels mark schemes, and the slide that follows explains the AO split in the levels marks. A slide after that briefly gives a bit more explanation. All levels injunctions and marks have their own mark scheme. This means, for example, that an 8-mark discuss question focusing on AO1 and AO2 has its own mark scheme. You can find an example on page 49 of the A-Level SAMs, question 13. You can use this levels mark scheme for any homework questions you set, using discuss for 8 marks. Similarly, an evaluate question for 12 marks, which focuses on AO1 and AO3, has its own mark scheme, page 57 of the SAMs, question 15. The marks and AO split that are being used are given on the next slide. And for each of these, you will find an example levels mark scheme in the SAMs, so you can use them with your students. This is just about questions with 8 or more marks available. The aim is to make every question in an exam accessible to every student. The assessment objective being tested can to an extent be worked out by the injunction. For example, evaluate is likely to be AO1 and AO3. However, it is what is being asked that is the important thing. For example, give one strength of using a case study is AO3 if it asks the candidate to evaluate. The candidate needs to answer the exact question, and in many ways does not need to worry about assessment objectives as such, though it can help to know what each injunction is asking for, and that is why the injunctions are listed and explained in Appendix 6 of the specification. This slide gives a breakdown of the levels-based mark, questions and answers. Up to 8 marks, questions are marked in a points-based way. For points-based marking, students need to know that they have to make a point clearly and effectively, and each relevant point they make gets a mark. You can use the SAMs to find out more, such as how explain, for 2 marks, has one main point that gets a mark, and then there is a mark for justifying the point. Levels-based are perhaps a bit harder to work out, though the SAMs have the information. This slide is here to summarize, however, and should be useful. You need to know that if a question has any AO2 and is levels marking, has 8 marks or more, the question will have within it, you must make reference to the context in your answer. Firstly, when levels questions have an element of AO2. 8 marks questions are always just 2 AOs and marked giving 4 marks for one of the AOs and 4 marks for the other. With AO2, an 8-mark question has 4 AO1 marks and 4 AO2 marks. With no AO2, an 8-mark question has 4 AO1 and 4 AO3 marks. If there is AO2, you will note from the information in this slide that there are always 4 marks available for the AO2 element. For 12 marks with AO2, which gets 4 marks, the split between AO1 and AO3 is even, 4 AO1 plus 4 AO3. For 16 marks with AO2, which gets 4 marks, AO1 has 6 marks and AO3 has 6 marks. Again, an even split. For 20 marks, if there is AO2, which gets 4 marks, then the AO1 has 8 marks and the AO2 has 8 marks, also evenly split. When there is AO2, it has 4 of the marks, and the AO1 and AO3 are evenly split thereafter. Secondly, when levels questions have no AO2. If there is no note to students telling them to use the context, then students know there is no AO2 in the answer. This is for levels marking. In points-based marking, they may well have to respond to short questions about stimulus material, such as a method question. No AO2. For 8 marks, 4 marks are for AO1 and 4 marks are for AO3. For 12 marks, there are 6 AO1 marks and 6 AO3 marks. For 16 marks, the AO1 gets 6 marks and the AO3 gets 10 marks. For 20 marks, the AO1 gets 8 marks and the AO3 gets 12 marks. That is what the chart here is saying, and hopefully it is helpful. It does not take long to grasp these figures, and they are illustrated in the SAMs. The 16 and 20 mark answers are in Year 2 and are in Year 2 SAMs. With regard to some ideas about exam writing, Here are some that come from previous A-level exams that might help in preparing students. In a two-part question, where a choice is in the first part and then discussed in the second part, be sure to stick to the same idea in both parts. Read the question carefully and only answer the question. Avoid rewording the question as an answer. This does not actually answer the question. When using terms, make sure the answer clearly shows understanding of the terms. Be specific in an answer, such as not just claiming a study lacks validity because it is an experiment. We could say Pavlov truly measured salivation, for example. Make enough use of the given scenario within answers. Answers should be contextual when there is a scenario and when material is to be applied. Expand on an answer that has 2 marks available to avoid getting just one of the marks available. Aim to avoid learning strengths and weaknesses in a rather shorthand form, and so not elaborating in an examination. Be sure to read the question accurately. A candidate is advised to read the question through and then read it again to check that the interpretation is correct, and perhaps read it again after or partway through an answer. This is a points-based answer to a question, asking for one strength of using case studies of people with brain damage to find out about memory. The point made in this answer is that case studies of people with brain damage are more ethical than using an invasive technique, and they are a way of getting unique and detailed data in a relatively ethical way. The answer clearly focuses on the question, both looking at case studies of brain-damaged patients and looking at them with regard to knowing more about memory. The mark scheme, on page 41 of the AS SAMS, gives the point that is written out here and shows how the 2 marks are awarded. 1 mark with regard to this answer is for the point about no deliberate damage, as such damage would be unethical, and then a 2nd mark for elaborating about the method being non-invasive and allowing depth and detail in data about how memory works. This question has explain as the injunction, which means giving a point and then justifying it, which is done here. So 2 marks would be awarded. This is an example of points-based marking. More about levels marking is given on the following slide. This is a short answer, given that there are 8 marks available. This is done so that it can form a short task in this presentation. Levels marking for an 8-mark assess question allocates 4 A01 and 4 A03 marks, as has been discussed earlier. The candidate does not have to write out the A01. It can be drawn from their answer. In this answer, there is quite a bit of A01 about both studies. The answer correctly explains each research method and a bit about how groups were formed. Clearly, there is a lot of detail missing, but there is enough here to show that there is some knowledge of the 2 studies. There is also some knowledge of what science entails. A03 is also in evidence, though of course briefly. There is a comparison between the 2 studies and a bit of a link to cause and effect conclusions. Even in this short answer, you can see there is material that responds to the question. The levels for an 8-mark assess question are found on page 49 of the A-level SAMS. There is some accurate knowledge and perhaps a partially developed discussion, though of course a candidate would write more. This answer is between levels 1 and 2 and might get 3 marks. There would be standardization and so on in real marking, but this hopefully gives you an idea of how levels marking works. If you are using levels marking with your students, always start from the highest level and top marks and work down. It is better to see if a candidate has achieved the top level first, to try to give them the highest marks possible. If they do not match the highest level, then try the next one down, and so on. Here is a brief overview of what has been covered in this presentation. The course was explained, giving the structure. The A-level is over 2 years, with 3 exam papers at the end of that time. The AS is over 1 year, largely being Year 1 of the A-level. The content of Year 1 was gone over, including focusing on the structure, in that each of the 4 Year 1 topic areas has content, methods, studies, key question, and practical investigation. Co-teaching the AS and A-level was covered, including suggestions about teaching issues and debates, and where they fit. Assessment was explored, looking at A-level and at AS. Some teaching ideas and resources were covered, including the free resources on the Edexcel website. Finally, more on assessment, with 2 examples to help make the points. GCSE English subjects and Maths are changing first for first teaching in September 2015, with first assessments in summer 2017. GCSE Psychology is scheduled to change in 2017. And you can keep an eye on the Edexcel website to see progress, as well as using the Ofqual website to look at the subject content once it is decided. GCEs for a range of subjects including psychology, as you know, are changing first for first teaching in September 2015, with first assessments in summer 2017. Other subjects are in the next phase of changes. We constantly look to improve the delivery of our training and appreciate all delegate feedback. Delegates will soon receive an email directing them to our online feedback form. The form takes no more than a couple of minutes to complete. Please ask them to take the time to let us know their thoughts by filling in this short form.